In 1925, at the U.S. Open, there's a golfer named Bobby Jones who was standing over his ball in the rough. And as he addressed it, the ball moved. It was barely a fraction of an inch. Nobody saw it, not his playing partner, not the officials, nobody. He was the only one in the entire world who saw it. He was the only human being that knew that ball moved. Bobby Jones called a one-stroke penalty on himself, and the officials, they tried to talk him out of it. His playing partner didn't see it, but Jones still insisted on that one stroke. And that one stroke put him into a tie at the end of the tournament, and he ended up losing the playoffs. Now, he lost the U.S. Open, the national championship, by exactly one stroke he called on himself for a ball that moved by a fraction of an inch that nobody saw. Now, here's the part of the story that I can't get away from. Afterwards, the sports writers, they wanted to make him a hero for it. They praised him for his honesty and his sportsmanship, and Bobby Jones got irritated. He said, "You might as well praise a man for not robbing a bank." Now sit with that for a second, because he wasn't being humble. He genuinely could not understand what there was to praise. In his mind, there was no decision to make at all. The ball moved, and that was a stroke. What was he supposed to do? What was any man supposed to do? He was supposed to tell the truth. And that's what this video is about. Not the penalty stroke, the sentence. Because somewhere between Bobby Jones and us, not robbing a bank becomes remarkable. And I want to spend the next hour or so figuring out how a man gets built or rebuilt into something where doing the right thing isn't a decision anymore. I'm going to tell you about 9 stories. Some of them are going to make you want to be a better man. A couple of them will probably make you angry. And at least one of them near the end, it might be about you, and it is about me. This is becoming a man of integrity. And I chose the word becoming on purpose. I want to start by getting the definition right, because I think most of us do have this wrong. If you asked 100 people what integrity means, most of them would say something like being honest or being a good person. That's not necessarily wrong exactly, but it's soft. It's like a greeting card definition, and a greeting card definition doesn't survive contact with real life. The actual word integrity comes from the Latin word integer, the same word used in math. Integer is a whole number, not a fraction, not divided, it's whole. A man of integrity is an undivided man. He's the same man in every room. The man that's at church on Sunday, at work on Tuesday, at home with his kids, the man alone in his car, the man alone on his phone at 11 o'clock at night. One man, not 4, not 5. I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying a man of integrity is the perfect man. Not at all. And if you stay with me to the end of the video, you're going to see the best integrity stories I know are about men who failed badly. I'm saying he's a whole man. That's the gap between who he is in public and who he is in private is actually small, and it gets smaller. Because here's what I've learned, and I've learned it the hard way. All the trouble in a man's life is in that gap, every bit of it. The distance between the man who people think you are and the man who you know you are. That space is where your fear lives, where the hiding lives, where the exhaustion lives. Because managing 2 men is exhausting, and managing 3, that's going to take you out. Now, Coach John Wooden, the great UCLA basketball coach, he won 10 championships, and Wooden had a distinction he came back to his whole life. He said, in essence, your reputation is what other people think you are. Your character is what you actually are. And then the part that matters, reputation is managed and character is built. Think about how much of modern life is reputation management. That's practically what social media is. And we have entire industries that are devoted to managing what people think we are, and almost nothing devoted to building what we actually are. Wooden said, be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because Your character is what you really are. And while your reputation is merely what others think you are, I want you to hold on to that one distinction, because every story I'm about to tell you for the next 50 minutes is secretly the same story. You've got a man standing at a fork in the road, and one path protects his reputation, the other path protects his character, and he can't take both. Bobby Jones chose character. Nobody would have ever known. His reputation was safe either way. He protected the one thing nobody could see. Now, let me show you what that looks like when the pressure is real. Because a ball moving in the rough is one thing. So let me show you what it looks like when 155 lives or $100 million or everything you own is on the line. It's January 15th, 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549. It takes off from LaGuardia, and about 3 minutes into that flight, it hits a flock of geese and loses both engines, both of them over New York City. Now, that plane is instructed to return to LaGuardia, but it's not going to make it. Now, you probably know this story. Captain Sully Sullenberger glides this Airbus with no engines onto the Hudson River, and he lands there. On board, 155 people, and they all survive. They made a movie about it. It's one of the most famous 3 minutes in aviation history, but that's not why I'm talking about it in this video. Here's the part most people don't know. After that plane came down and the evacuation was underway, passengers were out in the wings, there was ferries coming, the cabin was filling with freezing river water. It was in January, and it was in the Hudson River, and the aircraft was sinking. Sully walked the length of the cabin, the entire length, to make sure no one was left behind. And after he did that, he turned around and did it again. Twice through freezing water in a sinking aircraft, checking every row, and only when he knew personally that the cabin was empty, he got off the plane, and he was the last man off. Now think about it through Wooden's lens. The landing, that was skill. That was incredible to land that plane on water. 40 years of training compressed into 3 minutes. His reputation was already made the second that plane stopped moving. The cameras were outside. Nobody was grading him on what happened in that cabin. The 2 walks, that was character. That was who the man actually was when the visible part was over. And here's what I want you to catch. The famous moment and the integrity moment are almost never the same moment. The integrity moment hides inside the famous one in the part nobody films, which means, and follow me here, your life is full of those hidden moments too. You just don't have the famous part wrapped around yours. So now let's put a price tag on this. In the fall of 1982, Chicago, there are people that start dying and nobody knows why. 7 people, including a 12-year-old girl. And investigators, they figure out a connection. They had all taken Tylenol. Someone, to this day, nobody was ever convicted, had been taking bottles off the store shelves, lacing these bottles with the capsules and putting cyanide in there, and then put them back on the shelves. Put yourself in the chair of James Burke, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, the company that makes Tylenol. And here's what you need to know. 1, this was not your fault. The tampering happened on the store shelves after the product left your control. 2, it's localized to Chicago. And 3, no laws requires you to do anything nationally. And 4, this is the one that matters. Tylenol is one of the most important products. It's a massive piece of your business. The advisors are telling him a national recall is overkill in this situation, and some government folks aren't pushing for one either. The lawyers are nervous, and Wall Street is watching. But Burke, he pulls every bottle of Tylenol in America, 31 million bottles, off every shelf in every store in every state, and it costs the company roughly $100 million. And that's 1982. And when people asked him why go that far when the law didn't require it, when it wasn't your fault, his answer was almost boring. He pointed at the company credo. Johnson & Johnson had this credo written decades earlier, and the first line says the company's first responsibility is to the people who use its products. And Burke's reasoning was basically either that document means something or it doesn't. And if it only means something when it's free, it almost never means anything at all. That last part, that's the sentence I tattoo on every mission statement in America. Your values are only real at the moment it costs you something. Before that moment, they're decoration. Now, for the footnote to the story, the experts said Tylenol was a dead brand, but it came back within a year stronger with the tamper-proof packaging that Burke's team invented, which is now on every product you buy. Doing the right thing turned out to be the best business decision that he ever made. But here, this is important. He didn't know that when he decided. Don't let the happy ending fool you. He signed off on losing $100 million because of a sentence in a credo. The vindication came later. It usually does, but sometimes it doesn't at all. I run a business, a small one, and I can tell you the Burke test shows up at every size. It shows up at $100 million, and it shows up at $15. And it's the same test. What do you do when honesty has a price and nobody's making you pay it? Now, here's one that gets more shocking every year that passes. It's January 1953, and Harry Truman finishes his second term as President of the United States. He's the man who ended World War II, who built NATO, who desegregated the military, and was one of the most powerful men in the history of the world. And he gets on a train and he goes home to Independence, Missouri. Broke, or close to it. There was no presidential pension in those days. That law got passed later, largely because of Truman's situation. He had his Army pension from World War I and not much less. He and Bess moved back into their mother's house. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The offers came in immediately. Corporations wanted him on their boards. Businesses wanted him as a consultant. Spokesman, a name on their letterhead. Big money, life-changing money, for doing essentially nothing. But he turned them all down, every offer. And his reasoning was one of the cleanest integrity statements I've ever come across. He said, in essence, they don't want me, they want the presidency. They were trying to buy the office. And the office doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the American people, and it's not for sale. So he lived modestly, wrote his memoirs, and answered his own mail. Think about the distinction that man was making. He could tell the difference between what he had earned and what he had merely been entrusted with. The presidency passed through his hands. It was never his to cash in. And I'd ask myself, what passed through your hands that was never yours to monetize? A position at work, a role at church, somebody's trust, access to somebody's story, somebody's weakness, influence over your kids. A man of integrity knows which part of his life are assets and which parts are a trust. And he can feel the difference in his hands. One more, and this one costs the most. Roberto Clemente, if you know baseball, you know the name. Pittsburgh Pirates, one of the greatest right fielders who ever lived, 3,000 hits on the nose, first Latin American player introduced into the Hall of Fame. But baseball is not why there are schools and hospitals and streets named after him all over this hemisphere. It's December 1972. A massive earthquake levels Managua, Nicaragua. Thousands dead. Clemente, who was from Puerto Rico and was beloved all over Latin America, throws himself into relief work. Organizes aid, raises money, arranges flights of food and medicine. And then word gets back to him that the aid isn't arriving. The shipments are landing, and corrupt officials are stealing the supplies before they reach the victims. So Clemente decides he's going to get on the next relief flight himself, personally, because, and this was his reasoning, they wouldn't dare steal it if he was standing right there. New Year's Eve, 1972, the plane is old, overloaded, and it goes down in the ocean shortly after takeoff from Puerto Rico. Roberto Clemente was 38 years old. His body was never recovered. He didn't have to be on that plane. He had already done more than anyone could ask. The money, the organizing, the name landing. He could have stayed home with his family on New Year's Eve, and not one person on this earth would have ever faulted him. But he had told people the aid would arrive, and he was the kind of man who guaranteed his word in person. Now, I'm not telling you integrity means dying on a plane, so please hear me on this. I'm telling you what the ceiling looks like, so we can be honest about where the floor is. Sully walked a sinking cabin twice. Burke paid $100 million. Truman turned down a fortune. Clemente got on the plane. The scale changes. The move is identical. When keeping your word got expensive, they paid. And you could watch all four of these stories and walk away inspired. And I could end the video right here, and it would be a nice video, nice and useless. Because there's a question hanging over all of this that we haven't touched. What happens when a man doesn't pay? What does it look like when a man chooses reputation over character, not once, but as a lifestyle? I need to show you. It's not pretty, but I promise it's necessary, because the way down and the way back up are two halves of this video. And we're at the hinge right now. So remember Bobby Jones, golf moves a fraction of an inch, nobody sees it. He calls the penalty on himself. I want to show you the same story in a mirror, the same arena, professional sports, opposite man. So now we have Lance Armstrong. You know the outline. He survives cancer and nearly kills him, comes back, and he wins the Tour de France, the hardest endurance event on Earth, 7 consecutive times from 1999 to 2005. It was the greatest comeback story in the history of sports. Books, the foundation, the yellow bracelets. Hundreds of millions of people were inspired by this man. And it was all chemically manufactured. Armstrong was doping the entire time. One of the most sophisticated doping programs anybody'd ever seen. In 2012, the anti-doping agency laid it all out. He was stripped of all 7 titles, and in January 2013, he sat across from Oprah and admitted everything. Now, here's the thing. If this story ended there, Armstrong wouldn't be in this video, because here's an uncomfortable truth about that era of cycling. A lot of the riders were doping. The whole sport was dirty. If doping were the whole story, Armstrong would just be the most famous cheater in the field of cheaters. That's not why he's in here. He's here because of what he did to the people who told the truth. A newspaper, the Sunday Times, reported on the doping evidence. They reported it accurately, mind you. Armstrong sued them and won money from them for printing the truth. Emma O'Reilly, she was a massage therapist for his team. An ordinary working person, no power, no platform. She told journalists what she'd seen and done, including transporting drugs for the team. All true. Armstrong went after her publicly, calling her a liar, attacked her character and her credibility. And I won't even repeat everything he called her. And he tried to bury her legally. An ordinary woman against the most powerful man in the sport, and her sin was telling the truth. Betsy Andrew, the wife of one of his own teammates. She testified under oath that she was in a hospital room in 1996 and heard Armstrong telling his doctors what drugs he'd used. Armstrong spent years trying to destroy her for it, publicly branding her as crazy, vindictive, and a liar. And for over a decade, this was the pattern. The truth would surface somewhere, and Armstrong would locate the person it came from and try to crush them. He used lawyers, media, money, and the biggest platform in sports, not to hide his secrets, but to punish honesty itself. Now hold the two men side by side because this is the whole act in one image. Bobby Jones penalized himself when nobody was watching. Lance Armstrong attacked witnesses when everybody was. And catch what that tells you. The doping was the character failure, but the war on the truth was the integrity failure. And the second one is what people can't forgive. Failing is human. Everybody watching this has fallen. I sure haven't. We'll get there. But there's a fork in the road right after that fall, and it's the same fork every time. You can make peace with the truth, or you can go to war with it. Armstrong chose war for 13 years, and the war did more damage than the crime to others and in the end to himself. Keep that fork in your mind. We're going to see it 2 more times at bigger scale, and then in the next act, we're going to watch men choose the other path. Now, let's scale it up from 1 man to 20,000 people. So we're at Enron. It's Houston, Texas. By 2001, this is the 7th largest company in America. Fortune magazine had named it the most innovative company in the country, not once, but 6 years running. And the stock is a rocket. The executives are celebrated. Jeff Skilling, the CEO, is considered maybe the smartest man in the American business, and the whole thing is fiction. Underneath the innovation story, Enron is hiding billions in debt, using a maze of off-the-book partnerships and accounting tricks. The profits investors are celebrating largely aren't real, and the company is a photograph of a building with nothing behind it. December 2001, it collapses. At the time, the biggest bankruptcy in American history, roughly 20,000 employees lose their jobs. And here's the part that should make you angry. Thousands of them had their retirement savings in Enron stock. Many were encouraged to keep it there even while the executives were quietly selling, and they lost everything. Not just took a hit, everything. Janitors and secretaries and engineers who did nothing wrong were wiped out. Skilling was convicted and served over a decade in prison. Ken Lay, the founder, was convicted too, but he died before sentencing. Now, why is a corporate collapse in a video about becoming a man of integrity? Because of one detail down inside the wreckage, and I think it might be the most important detail in this whole hour. Her name is Sharon Watkins. She was a vice president at Enron, and in August of 2001, months before the collapse, while the stock was still flying and the magazine's covers, they're still coming, she looked at the books, saw what was actually there, and wrote a memo directly to Ken Lay, the chairman, the founder. And in that memo, she warned him in writing that the company could implode in a wave of accounting scandals. Think about the room she was standing in when she did that. Everyone above her was invested in the fiction. The entire culture of that company ran on not anything she said. So there was no upside for her. No reward, no cover, no exit plan. Just a woman looking at numbers that didn't add up, deciding she wasn't going to pretend what they did. Here's what gets me. Thousands of people at Enron were positioned to see pieces of the truth. The accountant saw it. The auditor saw it. Arthur Andersen, one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the world, went down in the wreckage because they'd signed off on it. Lawyers, bankers, analysts, layer after layer of professionals whose entire job was to catch this. One vice president wrote that memo. And that's the lesson of Enron for you and me, because you and I are never going to run a Fortune 500 company. The lesson is integrity failures at that scale are never one man's lie. There are thousands of people deciding individually, quietly, that it's not their place to say something. A collapse like Enron is built out of 10,000 small silences, which means the opposite is also true. The integrity of any group you're part of, your company, your church, your family, is being decided by whether the people who see the truth say it. Sharon Watkins is in this video because the memo is available to you. This week, at your scale, the memo is always available. The question is only ever whether you'll write it. This last one is the heaviest. I'm going to ask you to just let it land. Pat Tillman was a safety for the Arizona Cardinals, a genuinely unusual man. Fierce, thoughtful, read philosophy, and rode his bike to training camp. And in the months after September 11th, Pat Tillman made a decision that stunned the country. He walked away from a multi-million-dollar NFL contract and enlisted in the Army alongside his brother Kevin, and he became a Ranger. And here's the first thing you need to know, because it tells you who he was. He refused every interview about it, every single one. The military would have loved that PR. The networks were begging. He said no to all of it because he hadn't done it to be seen doing it, and he was not going to let his service become a commercial. That decision right there, turning down the reputation while paying the full price of the character. Pat Tillman belongs in the first half of this video. That's a Truman grade refusal. April 22nd, 2004, in Afghanistan. Pat Tillman is killed in action. Within days, the Army knew internally what had actually happened. They knew that Tillman had been killed by friendly fire, his own side, in the confusion of a canyon ambush. This is a tragedy, the kind war produces. It's devastating but not shameful. Fratricide happens in combat, and the honest telling of it would have been painful and clean. But that's not what they did. The Army awarded him a Silver Star with a written narrative describing his charging the enemy. They told the country he died leading his men against enemy fire, and they told his family the same story. His mother, his brother Kevin, who was serving in the same unit nearby when it happened, they stood at his memorial service and heard a fabricated account of their son's death told to millions. The truth actually came out weeks later, dragged out under pressure, and even then it came out in pieces with investigations that raised more questions than they answered. His mother, Mary Tillman, spent years of her life fighting to force the full record into the open. The family that had given the country their son had to go to war with the institution he died serving just to get to the truth of how. Now, why does this one hurt worse than Armstrong or Enron? Sit with that question, because the answer matters. Armstrong lied to protect himself. Enron lied for money. Those are ugly, but we understand them. The Army didn't lie for money. The men who signed off on that story probably told themselves it was something good. The war effort, the morale, the honoring a hero, protecting the family from ugly details. That's what makes institutional integrity failure so dangerous. It almost always wears a noble costume. Somebody in a room decides the story of Pat Tillman was worth more than the truth of Pat Tillman. And here's the brutal irony. They had a genuine hero, the real story, a man who gave up millions, refused all credit, served with honor, and died in the tragic confusion of combat. That story had more integrity than the fiction wrote. They took the one thing about Pat Tillman that was most sacred, which was that he was real, and they falsified it. To protect it, they said, the cover-up desecrated the very thing it claimed to honor. So there's the pattern. 3 times at 3 scales. Armstrong, the cover-up, did more damage than the doping. Enron, the hidden debt, did more damage than the honest losses ever would have. Tillman, the false story, did more damage than the true one. Say it plain. The fall is never the end of the integrity story. The response to the fall is. And now I have to be honest with you about why I structured the video the way I did. Because if you're watching this, really watching this deep in, there's a decent chance you're not sitting there as a Bobby Jones. There's a decent chance some part of your life, past or present, has an Armstrong pattern in it, or a small Enron, or a story you've let stand that isn't true. A gap between the man people think you are and the man you know you are. I'm not guessing about that. I know, because that was me. And the question you're asking isn't how do I stay whole? It's, is there a way back? That's the last act, and it's the reason I made this video. This is my favorite story in the video, and there's a good chance you've never heard of it. In 1963, Britain, John Profumo is one of the most promising men in the country, a war hero, landed at Normandy, married to a famous actress, Secretary of State for War in the cabinet, and people talked about him as a future prime minister. He had everything a reputation can hold, and he had an affair with a young woman named Christine Keeler. And that scandal had a national security edge to it because she was also involved with the Soviet attaché, Cold War Britain. You can imagine the fire. But here's the thing, and this is the detail everything turns on. The affair wounded him. What destroyed him was that he stood up in the House of Commons and denied it. He lied to Parliament, and in that world, in that era, lying to the House was the unforgivable act. Weeks later, the truth collapsed on him. He resigned in total disgrace. The government itself was shaken. His name became shorthand for scandal, the Profumo affair, and it's still in the history books. In 1963, John Profumo was the most humiliated man in Britain. Now here's where the story becomes the reason I'm making this video. What does a man do in that position? We know the modern playbook, right? It's lay low for a season, hire the PR firm, write the memoir with carefully worded chapter of regret, do the redemption arc interview, rebuild the brand, reputation management. Profumo did none of it. Not one interview, not one memoir, not one public word in his own defense. For the rest of his life, 4 decades, journalists tried. He never once told his side. Instead, quietly, he showed up at a place called Toynbee Hall, a charity settlement house in the East End of London, serving the poor, and he asked if he could help. They put him to work washing dishes, cleaning toilets, a man who had run the British Army's civilian leadership doing scout work in a charity kitchen. And he kept coming back. Not for a season, not until the press lost interest. He served at Toynbee Hall for 40 years. He raised funds, eventually becoming a senior figure there. But he began it at the sink, and he never traded on the work. Decades later, he was awarded one of Britain's highest honors, a CBE for charitable services. When he died in 2006, the disgrace was a footnote. The obituaries led with the redemption. Now, look at what that man understood, because it's the exact inversion of everything in Act 3. Armstrong's approach to his fall was attack the truth, protect the image. Profumo's approach was accept the truth completely and abandon the image entirely. He didn't try to look restored. He went and got restored in obscurity, one wash dish at a time, with no cameras present, which, if you've been paying attention for the last 40 minutes, is exactly where character has lived in every story I've told. Now, nobody's watching. That's where it fails, and that's where it gets rebuilt. I spend time around men in recovery. It's a significant part of my life. And I can tell you the men who make it back all have the Profumo shape to their story. And the men who don't. The ones who make it stop defending their record. They stop managing the narrative. They put their hands in the dishwasher, amends service, the unglamorous daily repair work, and they keep showing up long after anyone's keeping score. Restoration is real. I've seen it too many times to doubt it, but it never comes through the press conference. It comes through the kitchen. Now I want to take this one level deeper with the oldest story in the video. This is 3,000 years old. And if you're not a Bible person, stay with me anyways, because I'm not going to preach to you. I just need you to watch 2 seconds of one man's life, because those 2 seconds are the whole subject. King David, Israel's greatest king, and here's what's strange. The Bible calls him a man after God's own heart. And this is the same man who committed adultery with Bathsheba, the wife of one of his most loyal soldiers, Uriah. And when she became pregnant, David tried to cover it. And when the cover-up failed, he arranged to have Uriah killed in battle. Hearing that clearly, adultery, deception, and murder, the king, the man after God's own heart. Now, if David were alive today, Act 3 would have a 4th story. And for a while, maybe a year, it works. The cover-up holds, Uriah is dead, Bathsheba is his wife, the palace goes on. Nobody in the kingdom can touch the king, and nobody does. Then a prophet named Nathan comes to see him, and Nathan doesn't accuse him. He tells him a story. There were 2 men in a town, Nathan says, one rich with huge flocks, one poor who owned a single little ewe lamb, raised it with his children, fed it from his own plate, held it like a daughter. And then a traveler came to the rich man, and instead of taking from his own flocks, the rich man took the poor man's one lamb, killed it, and served it. And David, the king, he burns with anger. He erupts. He says, the rich man deserves to die. Who is he? Name him. And Nathan looks at the king and says 4 words. You are the man. Now freeze it right there, right at that instant, because everything I've talked about for 50 minutes comes down to what happens in the next 2 seconds. David is the king, absolute power. Nathan is the one man alone in the palace with no protection. David can have him removed, discredited, killed. He's already killed to protect this secret once. The Armstrong option is sitting right there on the table, and David can exercise it with a wave of his hand, attack the witness, go to war with the truth. Every earthly incentive points in that direction, and David says, I have sinned against the Lord. 5 words back. No spin. No mistakes were made. No attack on Nathan. The whole fortress of the cover-up, a year of it, comes down in one sentence, voluntarily, from the only man with the power to keep it standing. That's why he's the man after God's own heart. Not because he didn't fall. He fell as far as a man can fall. Because of his 2 seconds. Because when the truth finally stood in front of him and said, you are the man, he agreed with it. Out of that moment, tradition tells us, comes Psalm 51, David's prayer of repentance. And to this day, the rawest thing ever written about a man facing what he's done, create in me a clean heart, not restore my reputation, a clean heart. David asked for character repair, not image repair. 3,000 years ago, that man understood one's distinction better than we do. Here's why I put this story after Profumo instead of before. Profumo shows you the 40 years. David shows you the 2 seconds that start them. And I'm telling you from experience, the 2 seconds are the hard part. Every man watching this has a Nathan moment somewhere, past, present, or scheduled. Somebody or something or your own conscience at 2 a.m. standing there saying, you are the man. And your integrity, the whole subject of this hour, funnels down into what you say back. All right, before I bring this home, one last idea. It's not a story, it's a sentence. But it's the sentence that keeps this whole video from becoming poison. Because here's the danger of the last half hour. You watched Armstrong, Enron, Tillman's army, and there's a pleasure in it, isn't there? A little heat of righteousness. Those people, the cheaters, the executives, the brass, it feels good, and that feeling is a trap. Maybe the deepest integrity trap there is, because a man who's busy being disgusted with them has stopped inspecting himself. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a Russian writer who spent 8 years in the Soviet labor camps, the Gulag, and he'd earned the right to divide the world into evil people and good people, if any man ever had. He'd been on the receiving end of one of the most evil systems ever built. And in the camps, watching guards and prisoners, betrayers and betrayed, watching what he himself was capable of, he came to the opposite conclusion. He wrote that the line separating good and evil passes not between states, not between classes, not between political parties, but right through every human heart. Through every human heart. Through Armstrong's, through the general who signed Tillman's citation, through David's, through mine, through yours. So here's what that does to everything you've watched. This video was never about them. Bobby Jones isn't a different species from Lance Armstrong. They're the same species, same sport, even standing at the same fork, and the line ran through both of their hearts, and one man fed one side of it, and the other man fed the other. Every story tonight was really a picture of that line, and where it runs is through the middle of the man watching, which means the question this video leaves you with was never, are you a Jones or an Armstrong? You're both. I'm both. The question is which side of the line you're feeding. Today, this week, in the small stuff. And that's the last thing I want to talk about, the small stuff, because that's where all of this actually happens. Let's come all the way down from the mountaintop, because you and I, we don't live up there. You're probably never going to land a plane on a river. You will never recall $100 million of product. Nobody's offering you a fortune for your presidency, and God willing, you'll never board Clemente's plane. If those were the only arenas, integrity would be a spectator sport, something we watch great men do in documentaries. But you've met the everyday version you know you have. The furnace guy who looks at your unit and he could sell you the $900 repair. You'd never know the difference. You called him because you don't know, and he says it's a $10 part and I'll have it done in 20 minutes. You remember that guy forever, don't you? You tell people about him, $10, and he bought a reputation no ad budget could buy, except he wasn't buying anything. That's just who he was when a stranger's ignorance was sitting in his hands. The golfer at the public golf course on a Tuesday, no money on the line, nobody watching, who whiffs one in the rough and counts it. The person selling something secondhand who points out the flaw before you find it. You should know there's a chip on the backside. I see this in my own line of work. And I'll tell you, when someone does that, everything else they say is instantly worth more. One act of voluntary honesty reprices every word out of their mouth. The guy who gets too much change at the register and does the math out loud. It's small, right? Almost embarrassing to mention in the same hour as the Hudson River. Except go back through every story tonight and look at where that integrity actually lived. It was never in the famous part. It was in the unwitnessed part, the empty cabin, the ball nobody saw move, the memo nobody wanted, the dishes nobody watched him wash. The scale of the stage changes. The moment is identical every time. A man alone with a choice and no audience. Well, your life is made of those moments. This week, this very week, you're going to describe something you're selling to somebody who trusts your description. You're going to quote a price or a timeline or an expense report. You're going to be asked how the project's going, and the honest answer is behind. You're going to be alone with a screen. You're going to have a chance to let a flattering assumption about you stand uncorrected. Every one of those is the ball moving in the rough. Nobody will see it either way. That's not the loophole. That's the arena. Here's the mechanism, and then I'm done with the theory. Character is built exactly the way a body is built, by reps. Nobody gets strong on one heroic lift. Nobody gets integrity in one dramatic moment. Sully's 2 walks through that cabin were not a decision he made that day. They were the 10,000th rep of a pattern he'd been building for 40 years. Jones calling the stroke wasn't willpower. Remember, he couldn't even understand the praise. The reps had gone so deep, there was no decision left to make. That's the actual goal. It's not to win some future dramatic moment, to do the $10 part thing, the count the whiff thing, the point out the chip thing, so many times, so small, that when your big moment comes, and it will come unannounced, probably on an ordinary Tuesday, there's no decision left to make. You just do what you are. So 9 stories. Let me put the whole hour in 4 sentences. Integrity means whole. One man in every room. Character over reputation. It's invisible until it costs something, and then it's the only thing visible. The fall is never the end of the story. The response to the fall is, and the line doesn't run between us and them. It runs through the middle of your chest and mind, and it's fed or starved in the moment nobody sees. Now let me tell you why the title of this video is what it is. I did not call it being a man of integrity, and it's not because becoming sounded better. It's because I can't claim the other one. There are stories in the first half of the video that I watch the way you watch men taller than you. And there are patterns in the second half of this video that I recognize from the inside, from my own history, the gap, the managed image, the war with the truth. I've had my Nathan moments. I haven't always answered them like David. It took me longer than 2 seconds. In some cases, it took me years. What I can tell you is that the way back is real because I'm standing on it. Not at the end of it, on it. The dishes get washed one at a time. The reps count. The gaps between the man people think I am and the man I know I am is smaller than it used to be. And my whole job, the actual project of the rest of my life, is to keep on closing it. That's what becoming means. It's a direction, it's not a destination. So here's the only thing I'll ask of you, and it's not to subscribe. Sometime in the next few days, the ball is going to move in your rough. It'll be small. Nobody will see it. You'll know it when it happens because you'll feel the fork, the little flicker of nobody would ever know. Call the stroke, not because anyone's watching, because of who it makes you, because every time you call it, the line through your heart moves a fraction of an inch in the right direction, and the man you're becoming gets a little more whole. You might as well praise a man for not robbing banks. Let's become men like that.